Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room. Guys, happy Sunday. Today we're going to continue talking a little bit about the history of alienation in INFJs, the history of world affirmation, the opposite of alienation. Taking this historical perspective, which seems to have inspired and entertained a number of viewers according to your comments. So I saw those and I was like, wow, I did not know what to expect. And it turns out that, it resonated, at least with a good number of you. And that's exciting to me because, again, it is an enterprise that I find exciting, resonates a little bit with my kind of couple of backgrounds and areas of expertise. So I kind of want to continue exploring this, and it very much has the kind of stamp of an exploratory excursus because, I'm also exploring these thoughts as I go. So I'm always relying on your sort of inputs and feedback to kind of carry this forward, It's an interactive exercise. Even though, given my schedule and given the demands of life, I wish I could respond to all comments. I tend to heart the comments as acknowledgement that I've read them and they inspire me as I kind of carry on. And this is how I carry them forward and take them into account. And I hope you can appreciate that. I think you guys understand that. But without further ado, let's have a look at this history, So before I move on, remember, I have written this book on the INFJ that you can check out the links below. Amazon links, less than $10, The Ecstatic Soul, and my new novel, The Infinite Castle. Okay, also at the links below. And don't forget that you can support me on Patreon. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. So during the last video, I left you guys with this idea that there's a strong chance that the Buddha and the whole philosophy of Buddhism had its origination in world denial. Now the irony in this, of course, is that in the vocabulary of Buddhism, there's this constant talk of enlightenment, and its opposition to, by implication, non-enlightenment, which would be world affirmation in some way. Now the irony in this is that, according to my terminology, like an INFJ is world denying when they are alienated, and they're world affirming when they are enlightened. So there seems to be a reversal of the semantic relationship here. Now, of course, this is not necessarily the case in assessing Buddhism, because in Buddhism, it could be argued just as easily that once you're enlightened, you're also world affirming. So, this is a complex picture. But in any case, I want to return to this idea that there are different types of INFJs at different times in history, but they seem to have been united by either having a stance of world denial or a stance of world affirmation. If you remember, because this is an important aspect, this is not just an arbitrary tagging of the idea of world denial or world affirmation to particular kinds of INFJs. It's very much related to concepts in this book, right? To an existential analysis. One might call it a Dasein analysis, for Heideggerians, but as applied to INFJs, whether, they relate to their cognitive function stack in such a way as to empower themselves for the world as it is, the physical world of social relationships, or whether that move, which is made via FE, in my estimate, is not made in preference for a coping mechanism that is oriented toward NI principally and the other introverted function in the stack, which is TI. That tends to come with evaluation of world denial, world as the sensual world of social relationships, which is a more extroverted world. In Buddhism, it seems quite clear that the impermanent, enslaved state of the world, if we take it literally, it seems quite clear that this leads to world denial. It's interesting, I think, to try to look at different perspectives that have cropped up throughout history. But maybe before I do any of this, I sort of want to point out, I sort of want to jump forward to our contemporary era and point out some kind of tension in the very idea of personality types from the point of view of the INFJ, the NI lead, potentially more broadly speaking, as either words affirming or word denying. Okay? Now, here is the tension that I want to talk about. One of the differences between the behavior of an INFJ as it would have been way back in the classical age or before the classical age, so millennia ago, and the behavior of an INFJ today, of course, it won't have escaped you notice. One of the important distinctions is that the INFJ today, insofar as he or she identifies as an INFJ, has the concept of INFJ, right? It's a big difference between an INFJ back in the day who would have been INFJ, perhaps, but certainly wouldn't have self-described as INFJ. So, because they didn't have the concept. Jung hadn't flourished to provide that concept, or provide a foundation for that concept to come into its own. So what distinguishes us INFJs nowadays from INFJs back in the day is that we are able to self-describe as INFJs because we possess the concept. Now, the interesting bit of tension here is that concept wouldn't have had the conditions to come into being if it were not for the preconcept of personality, which probably didn't exist, almost certainly didn't exist in the classical age. It's a modern invention. It's a concept. It's one of the features of modernity. This concept of personality wouldn't exist, wouldn't be possible without the concept coming before that concept of the self. Not just the self as a unitarian entity, as a unified entity. And of course, Buddhism rejects this, but the self as something that is unified is not necessarily completely an invention of modernity. You could go back in time for its genealogy. For example, its genealogy in the soul in Platonism, and the further definitions that were provided of the soul in Christianity. So the elaboration of the concept of soul, and by this, the same token, it's redefinition, its modification in Christianity as compared to Platonism. But nevertheless, this idea of a substantial soul also goes by way of Leibniz and Descartes to the idea of a unitary self. But what I mean to say is that the way in which we nowadays are so self-conscious about ourselves as an interior, as an entity with a sort of innerness and an interiority, just the extent to which we are self-aware of it is very much a feature of modernity. And from this idea of the interior substantial self to a unitary self, to the idea of that particular self having the quality of a personality coming with its cognitive functions. I mean, of course, it's possible to see that genealogy and to see that as something that, makes sense in terms of a series of logical entailments. But here's the tension. Well, the tension is that this unitary substantial self, or formerly called the soul, is a very much atomized entity. It's individuated. It becomes an individual through this process with its unique set of qualities that it may have in common with other selves, in which case we call it the same type. We attribute type INFJ to myself, to other selves, to you guys' selves if you are INFJs. If you are INFPs, your selves, are independent, autonomous, substantial selves that happen to have slightly different qualities you have in common with some other people, and other qualities that you don't have in common with them. But insofar as the self is individuated in this way, well, it's almost a recipe for a new kind of alienation. It's a recipe for any kind of alienation because the prerequisite or the preconditions of even understanding ourselves as selves is not how we project it into relationship with other people. This is something that Heidegger and to some extent Wittgenstein too, we were trying to bring us back to. Our preconditions for understanding reality and how to cope with reality is kind of being alone, autonomous entities. Now, we enjoy the autonomy. Concepts of human rights are inextricably linked with it. So there are what you might call progressive concepts and achievements that have come with this idea of autonomous, independent selves. But there's also a great deal of isolation, of loneliness, that are the hallmarks of modernity too. Away from the more community-oriented lifestyle of, prior societies, perhaps, medieval societies, post-medieval societies, certainly the social tissue that was provided, social glue that was provided by religious life, or a life where religion occupied an important place. Now, obviously, religion has retreated. The self, the autonomous individual with their set of rights has come forward, but that individual is atomized. So in some sense, I sometimes wonder if the fact that we have this interest in personality is a way for us to kind of say, yes, we're atomized individuals, we are lonely, we want to reach out to the other, we're going to build, or we're going to use this Jungian framework and its concept of having extroverted and introverted functions, which are qualities of our substantial selves, to either, if we opt for the introverted functions in the stack, rationalize to ourselves why we're alone and make sense of it and cope in this way. Or if we embrace the whole of the functions, provide a bridge again onto other people via saying, oh, well, let's explore the possibilities in our FE. Let's explore the possibilities to some extent in our SE as well, which is, what I kind of advise in this book, particularly FE, because I argue, as you probably know by heart at this point, because I'm always harping on about it, that the way to SE is via FE. But maybe we would not have to do any of this. Maybe we would not have to try to acquire any of these concepts of being INFJ, of having NI and FE and TI and SE, if we were kind of beginning from the presupposition that we are in a community and that our relationship to others is antecedent to our self-description as autonomous individuals. Maybe the fact that we are trying to recreate that picture of ourselves as having an introverted set of functions, but also an extroverted set of functions, is our attempt to reach back to the world, to get out of this loneliness. Now that would not be just applying to INFJs, of course. It would apply to any individual ever who shows an interest in Jungian personality types. But the interesting aspect, of the INFJ and the INTJ in this particular quandary, if you like, is that in addition to that tension is going to be the replay of alienation versus worlds of affirmation. If we agree that tension, that dialectic, is less pronounced in the case of other types, it's not non-existent, but it's less pronounced, well then the challenge posed by modernity and this tension between, on the one hand, the autonomous individual, the substantial self, and on the other, the attempt to connect back to a sense of community, a sense of society with others, it's going to be more acute than ever with INFJs, because the INFJ, given how they are existentially, is going to be more tempted than others to utilize the cognitive functions as justifications for remaining within introversion and world denial, rather than as a tool to become more world affirming and reach back to others. And again, we can't really criticize this. It depends on how well someone copes, right? If they cope well, that's fine. There's no need to be a completely extroverted individual who's completely neurotic because they're not adapted to that world. But I just thought I would offer these thoughts about the more modern age after I talked about way back when Buddhism and early Christianity were blooming. And in fact, next time, or at least the next video in this series, maybe it won't be the next video, but the next in this series, I want to go back to Christianity a little bit and its relationship with Platonism, because in terms of world denial and alienation, but also some original and inventive additions that Christianity brought in comparison to Platonism in terms of the community aspect and the FE aspect, I think there's a lot to excavate here, but that will have to wait for a next video. So hopefully that video made sense. Let me know again what you thought, and if it was stimulating. Don't forget my Patreon page. And I'll see you next weekend, guys. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday before the week starts again. Ciao, ciao.